It was a calm, overcast morning in the small port town where Elena lived. The air smelled of salt water and the distant hum of busy docks filled the atmosphere. Elena stood by the pier, watching the fishermen unload their daily catch. She had always loved the ocean, the endless waves that stretched far beyond the horizon. But despite her deep connection with the sea, she felt trapped. Elena worked as a tour guide for the handful of tourists who came through town. Her job was to share the rich history of the port and its surroundings. But there was one problem. Elena wasn't confident in her English. Her accent, the nervousness in her voice, and the fear of making mistakes kept her from speaking fluently. So, she avoided using English whenever possible, relying on gestures and simple words instead. As a child, she had always dreamed of traveling the world, of being able to communicate effortlessly with people from all over. But now, standing on the dock, she felt the weight of that unspoken dream. Every tourist she greeted seemed to speak better English than she did. Today was no different. A group of American tourists had arrived at the harbor for a guided tour. Elena gave them a brief smile and waved as they approached, but her heart raced. They would soon expect her to speak in English, and she feared her words would fail her. She greeted them, her voice soft and hesitant. "Hello, welcome to the harbor tour. I am Elena." She paused, scanning their faces, searching for a sign of judgment. When one of the tourists smiled and said, "Hi, Elena. It's nice to meet you," Elena felt a small relief. Maybe today wouldn't be so bad after all. As they walked toward the boats, Elena pointed out landmarks and shared the history of the area in her halting English. She struggled with a few words, but the tourists didn't seem to mind. They smiled, nodded, and asked questions in slow, simple English. But inside, Elena felt the familiar pang of insecurity. "I wish I could speak more confidently," she thought. "I want to travel, to explore. But how can I, if I can't even speak English well?" By the time the tour ended, Elena was exhausted. As the tourists boarded their boat back to the city, she lingered by the pier, watching them leave. The breeze ruffled her hair, and for a moment, Elena felt a deep yearning to escape, to go beyond the boundaries of her small town and see the world. But for now, she was stuck with her fears and doubts. If only there was a way to break through the walls of hesitation she had built around herself. The day had been long, and Elena was exhausted. The sun had begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting a warm glow over the harbor. She stood near the docks, packing up her things for the day, when she noticed a figure approaching from the pier. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, was walking toward her with purpose. He was dressed in a faded navy shirt, his sun-kissed skin bearing the marks of time spent at sea. "Hello," Elena said with a slight wave, though she wasn't sure what to expect. The man, looking lost, paused in front of her. His eyes were a striking blue, almost as if the ocean itself had given him its color. He smiled and asked in a heavy accent, "Can you help me?" Elena blinked in surprise. She wasn't used to tourists asking her directly for help. Most people just followed the usual routes and didn't seek out a guide unless necessary. But something about his smile made her want to help. "Of course," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "What do you need?" "I'm looking for the market," he said, pulling out a crumpled map from his backpack. "But I can't find it. Can you show me the way?" Elena took the map and looked it over. She could understand most of it, but there were a few unfamiliar street names that she wasn't sure how to pronounce. For a moment, she hesitated, worried her English might fail her. The man looked at her expectantly, waiting for an answer. Elena started, her mind racing. "You need to go straight, then left, and then right?" She pointed down the pier, though her words felt clumsy and uncertain. The man nodded slowly, then gave a soft chuckle. "That sounds easy enough. Thank you." For some reason, his calm and friendly demeanor eased her nerves. He wasn't judging her for her hesitant English. In fact, his smile reassured her, and she found herself feeling a bit more confident. "I'm Julian," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for your help." Elena hesitated only for a moment before shaking his hand. "I'm Elena. Nice to meet you, Elena," Julian said, his voice warm. "I'm new here, and I could really use a guide. Do you give tours?" Elena felt a flutter of surprise. "Yes," she replied. "I'm a guide, but only for the harbor and the town. Not for the whole city." Julian's eyes lit up. "Well, maybe I could join you on a tour tomorrow. I've never been to this part of the world before." Elena smiled, a little surprised at the sudden invitation. "I would be happy to show you around," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As Julian walked off to explore the market, Elena stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the crowd. Something about his easygoing attitude made her feel different. For the first time in a while, she felt that maybe, just maybe, her English wasn't as much of a barrier as she had always believed. She took a deep breath and with a small smile, turned to gather her things. Tomorrow, she would give Julian the best tour of his life. The next day, Elena arrived at the docks earlier than usual, her heart beating faster than normal. She wasn't sure why, but the prospect of giving Julian a tour made her nervous in a way she hadn't felt before. She had given plenty of tours to tourists before, but this felt different. He wasn't just another group of strangers. He was someone who seemed genuinely interested, and that made her want to do her best. Julian arrived promptly, his wide grin as warm as ever. "Good morning, Elena," he greeted, his accent still strong, but his English easy to understand. "Good morning, Julian," Elena replied, trying to sound confident, though she could feel the tension in her voice. "Ready for the tour?" he asked, adjusting his backpack. "Absolutely," Elena said, feeling a little more at ease now that she had something to focus on. "Let's start with the harbor." The two of them began walking along the docks, Elena pointing out various boats and explaining the history of the fishing industry in their town. Julian listened intently, nodding every so often, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, really watched in a way that made her feel more self-conscious. As they passed the small market near the docks, Julian stopped, his curiosity piqued. "This place looks interesting. Do you come here often?" Elena smiled, relieved by the change of subject. "Yes, I do. They sell fresh produce and local crafts. You'll find some of the best souvenirs here." They walked through the market together, Elena introducing Julian to the various stalls and explaining what each vendor sold. The tourists in the area were few today, so Elena could relax, and the conversation flowed more easily. She found herself speaking more confidently than before, her English sounding more natural as Julian asked questions about the different goods. "How did you learn so much about this place?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Elena thought for a moment, surprised by the question. She had always thought of herself as just a guide, someone who recited facts for tourists. But now, speaking to Julian, she realized how much she actually knew. "I grew up here," she said, "and I've always loved learning about the history. It's in my blood, I suppose." Julian smiled. "I can tell. You're not just giving a tour, you're sharing a piece of yourself." The compliment made Elena's cheeks flush. "Thank you," she said, a little surprised by how much his words meant to her. As they continued their tour, Julian asked more and more questions, and Elena found herself answering with ease. Her confidence grew with every word, and the English that had once seemed like a barrier was now a bridge between her and this new friendship. By the time they reached the edge of town, Elena realized how much she had enjoyed the tour. It hadn't just been about showing Julian the sights. It had been about connecting with him, sharing her love for her home, and allowing herself to speak without fear of judgment. They sat at a small bench overlooking the ocean, taking a break. Julian took out a small notebook from his bag and began scribbling something down, though Elena wasn't sure what it was. "Do you write?" she asked curiously. Julian looked up, surprised by the question. "Yeah, I do," he said, his expression softening. "I'm a writer." "Well, trying to be anyway." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. What do you write about?" Julian hesitated, then shrugged. "Mostly stories about places and people. About things I've seen on my travels." Elena smiled. "You should write about this place then. It's beautiful here, and I think it could make a great story." Julian's eyes brightened. "Maybe I will," he said, his smile widening. The two of them spent the next hour chatting about writing, travel, and their dreams. Elena felt a sense of calm settle over her. She hadn't just helped Julian find his way around the town, she had opened up in ways she hadn't expected. She felt more at ease with herself and her English, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As they parted ways at the end of the day, Julian thanked her for the tour. "I had a great time, Elena. You're a natural guide," he said, giving her that familiar, reassuring smile. Elena grinned. "Thank you. It was my pleasure." She watched him walk away, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was trapped in her small town. She had shared something special with Julian, and in doing so, she had shared a little piece of herself with the world. The following days felt different. Elena could not shake the memory of Julian's compliment and the ease with which they had shared their conversation. For the first time, speaking in English didn't seem like an obstacle. It felt like a part of her journey, one that could open new doors. She found herself walking through the town with a sense of pride, her steps a little lighter, her shoulders a little less tense. As she returned to her routine, Elena's thoughts often drifted back to Julian. She had seen him around the town a few more times, but they had only exchanged polite greetings. He was busy with his writing, and she was consumed with her work. Yet, there was something about their brief time together that left Elena with a sense of possibility she hadn't known before. One afternoon, while guiding a small group of tourists through the town, Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Julian. "Hey, Elena. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in helping me with something. I'm working on a travel piece for a magazine, and I could really use your expertise about the town and its history. If you're up for it, I'd love to chat more." Elena blinked, rereading the message a few times before her fingers quickly typed a reply. "Hi, Julian. I'd love to help. What exactly do you need?" Within minutes, Julian responded. "Great. I'm planning to write a story that highlights the local culture, and I'd love your input. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow to talk more?" Elena felt a rush of excitement. This was her chance to do something beyond her usual tours, to step into a role where her knowledge of the town could be seen as valuable. She could help Julian tell the story of her home in a way that was fresh and exciting. "Tomorrow works. I'll be at the cafe near the harbor at noon," Elena quickly typed back. She spent the rest of the evening in a flurry of anticipation. What would they talk about? What could she offer him that he didn't already know? As she made her way to the cafe the next day, Elena's nerves returned. But this time, they were different. They weren't fueled by self-doubt, but by excitement. This was an opportunity to use her English in a way that felt purposeful. When she arrived at the cafe, Julian was already there, sitting at a small table near the window with a notebook open in front of him. He looked up as she approached and smiled. "Hey, Elena," he greeted. "I'm so glad you could meet me." "Of course," Elena replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. "I'm happy to help." They sat down, and Julian wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "I've been working on this article about local history, culture, and the fishing industry. I know you're a guide, so I'm hoping you can give me some inside perspective. I want to make sure I get it right." Elena felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. "I've lived here my whole life, so I know the stories people don't always share with tourists. I'd be happy to help." The conversation flowed naturally. Julian asked about the town's history, the people who lived there, the legends that were passed down through generations. Elena spoke with passion, detailing the customs, the annual celebrations, and the way the fishermen had shaped the town's identity. She shared the tales her grandmother had told her when she was younger, stories of storms that nearly destroyed the town and the resilience of the people who rebuilt it. As they spoke, Elena noticed Julian's eyes light up. He was taking notes furiously, his pen moving quickly across the page. She could see the story beginning to take shape in his mind, and she was helping to create it. The more she spoke, the more confident she became. Her English was flowing without hesitation, and the words no longer felt like a wall between her and the world, they felt like a bridge. When their conversation came to an end, Julian closed his notebook and smiled. "Elena, I can't thank you enough. This is exactly what I needed. Your knowledge is amazing, and I think this article is going to be incredible thanks to your help." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm really glad I could help. It was fun." Julian stood up and extended his hand. "Would you consider doing this again sometime? Maybe even work on more projects like this? I could really use someone who knows the town as well as you do." Elena smiled, her heart racing with the excitement of possibility. "I'd love to." As she left the cafe that day, Elena felt a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She wasn't just a tour guide anymore. She was a storyteller, a part of something bigger. She had taken her first step toward sharing her knowledge and her voice with the world without fear, without hesitation. And for the first time, Elena felt like her dreams were no longer out of reach. Over the next few weeks, Elena found herself immersed in a new rhythm. She continued with her daily tours, but now, in her spare time, she was also working with Julian. They met regularly at the cafe, where they would discuss the article, brainstorm ideas, and flesh out the details. Julian would take notes while Elena spoke, her words painting vivid pictures of the town's past and present. The more they worked together, the more Elena realized how much she enjoyed this new role. It was different from her usual job, but it felt right. As they worked, Elena's English began to improve even more. Julian often asked her to explain certain phrases or idiomatic expressions, and Elena found herself teaching him as much as he was teaching her. He would ask questions about cultural nuances or the way people in the town spoke, and Elena would eagerly explain. Sometimes they would laugh at the confusion of certain words or phrases, but that only made the learning process more enjoyable. One afternoon, as they were discussing a part of the article about local legends, Julian looked up from his notebook and smiled. Elena, I've been thinking, you're really good at this. Have you ever considered writing? Elena blinked, surprised by the question. Writing? She asked, unsure of what he meant. Yeah, Julian continued, leaning forward. You've got such a great knowledge of the town's history, and you're able to explain it in such an engaging way. I think you could write something amazing about it. You could even write a book or start a blog. Elena felt her stomach flutter at the thought. A book? A blog? She had never seriously considered writing before. Sure, she had always enjoyed telling stories, but to write them down for others to read, it seemed like a dream too big for her to reach. I don't know, she said, looking down at her hands. I've never thought of myself as a writer. I'm just a guide. I don't think I have the skills to write something that people would actually want to read. Julian shook his head, smiling gently. You've already proven that you know how to tell a good story. You don't need to be perfect. The important thing is that you share what you know, and do it with passion. I think people would love to read about the town through your eyes. Elena felt a spark of excitement. Julian's words lingered in her mind long after their meeting. Could she really write about the town? Could she share the stories that had been passed down to her, the ones that made the town so special? The idea began to take root, and she started thinking about the possibilities. The next few days were spent in a flurry of inspiration. Elena began writing down her thoughts whenever she could on napkins, in notebooks, even on the back of tour brochures. She started with small stories about the town's origins, the legends of the sea, and the people who had made it what it was today. Slowly but surely, she began to piece together a narrative. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. One evening, after finishing a particularly long tour, Elena sat down at her kitchen table and looked at her notes. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to try. She opened a blank document on her computer and typed her first sentence. The town by the sea had always been more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the people who had called it home for generations. The words flowed from her fingertips, and soon, Elena found herself writing not just about the town, but about herself, her love for it, the memories it held, and the people who had helped her become who she was. She didn't know where the journey would take her, but she knew she had to follow it. A few days later, she sent Julian a message, her heart pounding as she typed. I've started writing, just a few pages, but I think it's a start. To her surprise, Julian responded almost immediately. That's amazing, Elena. I knew you could do it. I can't wait to read it. His support meant more to her than she could express. It was the encouragement she needed to keep going, to keep writing, to keep dreaming. As the days passed, Elena continued to work on her writing. She balanced her tours, her time with Julian, and her new passion for storytelling. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path. Weeks passed, and Elena's confidence grew with each word she wrote. Her mornings were spent guiding tourists through the charming streets of the town, and her afternoons were dedicated to her new project. Each day, she would sit down at her small desk by the window, with a cup of tea by her side, and pour her thoughts onto the page. Slowly but surely, her collection of stories began to form into something more coherent, more substantial. The stories of the town, of its fishermen, of the legends of the sea, were taking shape in ways she had never imagined. One rainy afternoon, as she finished typing up a chapter about the town's annual festival, Elena received an unexpected phone call. It was Julian. Hey, Elena, he said, his voice bright with excitement. I've got something to share with you. You know that magazine article I was writing? Well, they loved it. It's going to be published next month. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Really? That's amazing. I'm so glad it worked out for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Julian replied. And there's something else I wanted to ask you. I've been thinking about the idea we talked about before about you writing more. What if you wrote a few pieces about the town for the magazine? They're looking for more local stories, and I think your voice would be perfect for it. Elena felt a rush of excitement. Writing for the magazine? It was everything she had hoped for, but it still seemed too big to be true. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. I've only just started writing. Don't worry about being perfect, Julian reassured her. You've got the knowledge and the passion, and that's what matters. You don't have to be a professional writer, you just need to share your story, the way you see it. I know the magazine will love it. Elena paused for a moment, the weight of the offer sinking in. It was a huge opportunity, one she had dreamed of but never thought possible. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. Great. I'll send you the details, and we'll work together to make sure everything's in shape. I'm really excited for you, Elena. You've got this. After hanging up, Elena sat in silence, letting the enormity of the situation sink in. She had always felt like an outsider when it came to writing, but now she had the chance to step into the world she had always admired from afar. The opportunity was there, waiting for her to seize it. Over the next few days, Elena poured her heart into her first piece for the magazine. She wrote about the town's fishing history, about the hardworking fishermen who had kept the community alive for generations. She described the boats that bobbed in the harbor, the smell of the salt water, and the sound of the seagulls crying above. It wasn't just a history lesson. It was a love letter to the town she had grown up in. When she sent the piece to Julian, she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. What if it wasn't good enough? What if the editors didn't like it? But Julian's encouragement had given her the push she needed to try, and she was determined to see it through. A few days later, Julian called her again. Elena, they loved it. The editors want to feature it in the upcoming issue. They think it's perfect for their readers. Elena couldn't believe it. Are you serious? I can't believe it. I knew you could do it, Julian said, his voice full of pride. You've got such a unique perspective on the town, and it shines through in your writing. I'm so proud of you. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt truly proud of herself. She had taken the leap, stepped outside her comfort zone, and shared her story with the world. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, she realized, was all that mattered. As the magazine article was published, Elena's world shifted. More people began to notice her writing, and she received messages from readers who had been touched by her stories. Some were from tourists who had visited the town and recognized her as the guide from the article. Others were from locals who were proud to see their history shared with such passion. Elena was no longer just the tour guide. She was a storyteller, someone whose words could reach far beyond the town's borders. Her life was changing, and she was changing with it. She knew that this was just the beginning, that there were more stories to tell, more opportunities to seize. Elena had found her path, and it was a path she was ready to walk. Months passed, and Elena's life began to feel more in tune with who she truly was. The rhythm of guiding tourists during the day and writing at night had become her new normal, and with each passing day, she felt more confident in her role as a storyteller. Her article in the magazine had opened doors she never expected. People began reaching out for her to write about the town for blogs, local newsletters, and even books. Elena was now recognized as the voice of the town's history, the person who could bring its past alive for others. One evening, as she sat at her desk, looking over an email from a publishing company that had expressed interest in her work, Elena felt a rush of gratitude. She had come so far from the unsure woman she once was. The dreams she had kept tucked away, too afraid to pursue, were now within her grasp. That night, as she prepared for her final tour of the day, Elena found herself standing by the harbor. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and the sound of the waves was as soothing as ever. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that the path ahead was her own to shape. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to read a message from Julian. I'm so proud of you, Elena. You've come a long way. You're doing amazing things, and I can't wait to see where this takes you. A smile spread across her face as she typed back, Thank you, Julian. I couldn't have done it without you. She tucked her phone back into her pocket and looked out at the town she had always loved. There was something magical about seeing it from this new perspective. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change the way others saw the world. But now, she knew she had the power to do just that. Later that evening, after the last tourist had left, Elena sat down to write once more. This time, she wrote not just about the town, but about herself. She wrote about the journey she had taken, the struggles, the doubts, the moments of clarity. She poured everything she had learned into that story, hoping that someone, somewhere, might read it and find the courage to take their own leap of faith, just as she had. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she thought about the future. Writing for the magazine was just the beginning. There were more stories to tell, more people to inspire. She didn't know where the road would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid to walk it. With a sense of purpose, Elena closed her laptop and stood up, looking out the window at the twinkling lights of the town. Tomorrow, she would guide more tourists. But tonight, she was simply Elena the writer, the dreamer, the storyteller, and she had found her place. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notifications so you never miss an inspiring story. Thank you for watching.